Hello and welcome to another Register Kettle, your chance to hear about the news from the people who actually write it. And there's really only one thing we can discuss today, and that's DeepSeek, the Chinese startup which has made waves across the AI industry and disrupted the entire thing. Now, joining us is Tim Prickett-Morgan from sister publication The Next Platform, who's been doing a deep dive into this. Tobias, Mann, who has done the hands-on experience and can tell us an awful lot about what they're actually offering and why. And Chris Williams, our editor-in-chief, who will be adding expertise and someone who's actually been using the basis. So, okay, Tim, first off, what's going on? How is this the revolution that people are claiming it is?
We're all not sure, to be honest. I read the paper, I read it again, and then I read it a third time to try to figure out what was going on with the V3 model. It seems that they were able to have 256 nodes to train this model, and I'm still skeptical of that. But the idea is that they have some refinements, some networking technologies, and I'm using the word networking kind of loosely. It's almost like a cache controller or something. It's called dual pipe that orchestrates the way the GPUs talk across the nodes in a way that seems to boost the throughput of the devices, which leads me to believe that these training runs that people are doing are not particularly computationally efficient if they're able to get that much more performance out of a small number of GPUs. There's a lot of other refinements and things, but that's the cut and dry of it, I think.
It's interesting you say cache control because you mean memory cache, but as soon as you say cache control, I was thinking, yeah, isn't the whole thing about this the fact that they did do some cache, as in money cache control on this? Yeah, the fact that it costs 5.5 million to train, which, I mean,
sort of,
yeah, yeah.
If you can get
does it or doesn't it? That's the key.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you can get H800s, which is what they say they trained it on, for $2 an hour without signing a 3-year contract, so every moment you're not training, it doesn't keep adding to the cost, sure, you can do it for 5.5 million. But if you wanted to buy those GPUs and own them, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars in a market that's highly constrained for a GPU that's not even legal in China anymore.
Yeah, it's, to me, the biggest thing here is the fact that it's the competition. It's the fact that I think that OpenAI was having a little bit too much of a free hand in all of this, and it's just good for competition. It's kind of like watching, dare I say it, RISC-V come up in the past, which has made inroads in places, but has not completely, overturned ARM or anything like that, but has made some inroads and kind of made people think about openly available architectures and things like that. And then here comes DeepSeek. I think DeepSeek is kind of like the RISC-V. It's a bit like the RISC-V moment for LLMs, I think, because it's not going to take the world by storm. It's good, but it's enough, I think, to it's enough to kind of keep everyone else on their toes a bit more, I think.
So it's good enough, but not quite there. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it's heavily censored, so
well, yeah.
It depends what you want to use it for, right? I mean, yeah, I mean it's heavily censored, so you're not going to get. And also, I saw a study that showed that it's not very good at recalling past historical. It's not good at recording historical facts like news very well. So if you ask it things like,
funny that.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Tiananmen Square is a wonderful square. Let's not mention the dead bodies.
They don't talk about squares in this thing.
No.
But I mean, TPM, you've been looking at the hardware behind this. I mean, it does seem like they are changing the game somewhat in terms of what hardware you are required now to run this kind of model on. How is that working out?
Well, the issue is, do you actually believe it, right? So there are many people who believe that there were prior things they did, and then they trained the model, and there's very little reinforcement learning, very, very little supervised fine-tuning in this thing. I mean, it was a fraction of the percentage of the compute. So I don't believe that, right? I don't believe that that's all that they did. And they talked about taking the R1 model and kind of like laying down its n-grams on this model. That seemed interesting, cool, but what about training R1? Doesn't whatever that took count against the training profile for this thing? So, do I believe that just on the face of it, that 2048 GPUs can train a model that competes with something that took 25,000 or 50,000 GPUs? Do I think there's a factor of 10x to 20x improvement? No, I don't. I don't believe that. So we don't really have anything but what that paper said, and I'm skeptical of that and have said it as much.
Yeah,
but
I mean, here's the thing: if you know, they can only say they were using H800s, and if they can only say that, then you can throw whatever number behind how many you want to use, and so long as the GPU hours line up, great, you can put that in the paper. If they actually used H100s, they're not going to say that. And there's a lot of folks out there that are saying that's what they did.
It's interesting.
Illegal kit. So,
well, I mean,
Tobias, you've been hands-on with this. How are you finding it? I mean, you did the original review. So, I mean, what are they offering?
So what they're offering is a number of models that have been, with R1 anyway, they are offering a number of models that have been kind of reinforcement trained in order to behave kind of like what OpenAI did with O1, this kind of thinking model that will take some time to process the request and kind of make take some time to work through any potential problems with just spitting out the first answer. So in theory, you're supposed to get a much more refined response that has a higher likelihood of being accurate, which is great. It does seem to be pretty compelling compared to OpenAI's best. So that's probably contributed to who the hype is. What is sort of missed around R1 is that it's really the reinforcement learning component of this that is what's happening with that model. And that's been applied to smaller models as well, which means now you can actually run this at home and kind of achieve that same kind of tier one OpenAI style thinking model on something that you have at home. And that's not something we've really seen before outside of a few examples that weren't really good.
Yeah, isn't a distilled version of R1 coming to, I'm pretty sure I saw that a distilled version of R1 is coming to Microsoft Copilot devices. And so you can run R1. I think this is it. This is it unlocking some things need to be done. Like in the same way, we see this so often in like the cycling of history. You know, you had huge machines that ran operating systems that were out of range, out of touch from most people. Mainframes, big room-sized machines. Then you had the microcomputer that kind of put it in people's hands. They weren't particularly great compared to the real machines, but they were good enough that you could use them in your home. And you see that cycling all the way through now into AI, where you have people like OpenAI want to offer things like O1 remotely. You have to do it through the cloud, and then you then have DeepSeek be like, well, you can just run it on your local machine now, if you like. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be. I mean, remember, we're talking about imperfect stuff anyway. I think this is the magic of LLMs is that as humans, when we interact with them, when they go wrong, we're kind of like, God damn the machine. As if like, you know, it's like your printer breaking down. But when it goes right, everyone's like, oh my God, it's thinking. Like we just, as humans, we just can't help but the way that we react to these things. So when DeepSeek does a good enough job, everyone's like, yeah, look at this. This is the thing. I think also this comes at a time when I don't know. I hate to think I'm terminally online, but this, because I try not to be, but it does come with the job. The fact that it came around about the same time that there was the whole America trying to ban TikTok, and then people finding alternatives to TikTok, and then it's like, well, hey, China doesn't seem that bad. Look, and I think DeepSeek's R1 came at just the right time because people were starting to say, you know, well, you know, the TikTok alternative in China, Red Note, doesn't seem so bad, or Little Red Book, as it's unfortunately called.
Yes, Little Red Book.
Little Red Book.
Word. I mean, it's very heavily censored. Yes, it might be an alternative to TikTok, but the idea of people handing over their details to China is really quite disturbing. Is the same thing going to come up with DeepSeek?
Willingly handing it over.
Willingly handing it over. Yeah. I mean, this is... Yeah, like...
And it leaks out.
Yeah, and then the security was terrible. Like, I don't want to talk too much about like the other stuff. Let's get back onto DeepSeek, but just briefly, like the fact that people went onto Little Red Book and looked around, and there was people taking videos in Shanghai at night, and people being like, "Wow, I can't believe China looks so nice." You know, it was like a soft power coup for them. And then for like a week or so later, for DeepSeek to arrive, and everybody loading it up, and it looks exactly like OpenAI. It even uses DeepSeek uses the exact API as OpenAI. So you
But
mad.
everybody does.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, maybe that's good.
Well, yeah, but I mean, also, I mean, Tom Claiborne, another register reporter, covered this. That it was literally answering, "I am an OpenAI, I am an Anthropic system." So there's clearly been some stealing going on, but
this is the reinforcement learning.
OpenAI and Anthropic,
that I think they're not talking about.
Oh, I'm shocked. Stealing is going on.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense because I don't really have a problem with them using OpenAI and Claude in that way. You know, what's that? An AI system that was trained on everyone's data is having itself now been used to train other systems. I mean,
world's tiniest violin.
How would that reinforcement then work? Like, how would that reinforcement work? Would they take the output of their model and then run it through like GPT and say,
yes.
Is this good or not? Is this good or not? Or would they say, how would you reply? Like, oh, I see, they're given the same prompts and then they compare the output. How would that work?
So reinforcement. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say either one of those approaches would be how you would do it, you know?
Right, okay.
Yeah. So there's generally in machine learning as a whole, there are two big approaches that are used. And with large language models, supervised fine-tuning has been one of the big ways to do it, where you kind of provide pairs, you know, input and expected output. And the model, through looking at distribution of the words in each, kind of figures out how to arrive at conclusions similar to that. And that's how, you know, a large number of large language models have approached this problem.
Right.
What DeepSeek is doing with reinforcement learning is actually not a new concept. Reinforcement learning is a pretty old one, in fact, but it allows itself, you set sort of parameters and at which point it gets a score. And if it does things better, it gets a higher score. And if it does things worse, it gets a lower score. And it sort of allows the model to self-train in this respect. How they're actually doing that in practice, it's a little beyond me, but that's kind of the idea behind this.
They're lying. It's really straightforward. So here, let me give you the numbers.
Oh, let's call it what it is. Come on, CPM.
Let me give you the numbers. 2.66 million GPU hours on the pre-training. 119,000 GPU hours on context extension, so they can take a bigger input. 5,000 GPU hours for supervised fine-tuning and reinforcement learning. No, don't believe it. I don't believe it. That's what they said. I don't believe it. Or all of that was done in R1 and then they laid the n-grams down. Okay, how much did that take? Oh, 10,000 GPUs, 3 months. Oh, right. Sorry.
We're talking errors.
I don't believe it.
No, I mean that's the whole thing here. You know, there's talk of Meta having war rooms trying to figure out how the heck this happened, if it happened at all. Because
that's how it happened, is my guess.
Yeah.
I just wrote up the paper. This is what they said. This is where I think this is weird. This is neat. Oh, look at this cool thing they did with the networking to try to, get them to run more efficiently. At best, you get 2x, 3x, maybe 4x out of that. You don't get 20x. Where's the 20x coming from?
Interesting.
It's always good to hold skepticism to this because it reminds me of chip manufacturers when they would be racing to make the smallest process node. Even though if you've got a 12 nanometer process node, there's nothing really that's actually 12 nanometer on there. And I remember someone saying, "Oh, our engineers couldn't get down to 12 nanometer, but the marketing department could." And I think the same's just happening here. Really, it's like, well, we can say we got to these benchmark levels, but we're not going to really explain how we actually got those benchmarks or how it was all built. It's but as long as it keeps, in my view, as long as it keeps everyone on their toes, as long as it makes, if it keeps OpenAI and I guess Google, who else is making large models out there? I was going to say Mistral, but everyone
seems to have dropped off the radar.
Anthropic.
Yeah, I knew that was another one. As long as it keeps them on their toes, as long as it keeps them honest, because I don't think anyone is served by having everybody just assume that OpenAI is the only available model. It was annoying for a while that everybody equated ChatGPT to AI for a while, and it's taken so much work by Anthropic and Google to kind of make it known that their stuff is also out there and it's just as good, if not better. And
is the model truly open source? And if so, I've said in my story, like, this is science, right?
Yeah,
repeat it.
Tobias, I know
Get
you've
20,000. Get 2048 H100s, put them on InfiniBand 100 gig, and show me.
I thought it was.
No one has done that, to my knowledge. Is to prove that they're right.
Yeah, I thought it was complete because I did look. I know that some of their stuff. I know that some of Alibaba's stuff, and that's another thing as well. Alibaba's put out its thing as well this week. I thought Alibaba's stuff was covered by a model license. So I thought DeepSeek was truly MIT. The code is open source and the weights are open source.
Like I said, any one of these labs can sit down and prove that they did or didn't do it.
Right.
So they have the tokens. They got 14 trillion tokens laying around. They can do it.
Happen, Mark.
So I'm surprised somebody hasn't declared, again, use American Sign Language, on this whole thing if it's not true. So I fully expect that to happen at some point. That doesn't mean that some of the neat things in the paper aren't true and they aren't useful. That's not what I said.
No, but Tobias, you were shaking your head quite vigorously at that.
Sorry, trying to get Edward in edgewise here, but like to Tim's point, it's like there's a whole these things are open in the sense that many of them are MIT licensed and they provide all the code in order to get there, but you have to supply most of the time they're not giving you the training data, and there's a lot of computation that can go into data prep in order to get high quality results. Chris, you mentioned Mistral. They, in all of the noise this week, they released an updated version of their small model where they went out of their way to highlight the fact that they didn't use any synthetic data in the training process. Now they're still not giving us the tokens, but we don't know how big an impact that made to this whole process. And so folks, claiming this is open source is like sort of.
Right,
but
I get it.
The training data is still a factor that's not being taken into account here.
Well, also one of their training data databases wide open earlier this week, as we reported, which is not exactly a good move. But
one of the back-end databases, not the training.
Yeah.
If I left the training database open, everybody'd be like, what's in there? I like the fact that if you ask DeepSeek R1 and if you ask DeepSeek R1 and V3 in English or Mandarin, what was the majority language of your training set, for example, it just refuses to answer. It just says, please refer to the documentation. So it's again, that's really funny when OpenAI was griping about them having been ripped off by these people. It's like, you don't provide your training data either. So it's like, it's not like DeepSeek went in and stole OpenAI's training data. We don't even know what training data OpenAI really uses. So this is it. It's like the more secretive you want to be, the harder it is to then complain about stuff later on when, things like this happen.
Okay. So to wrap up then, how good do you feel about this? Do you think it's actually is this just kind of like or is this actually a genuine improvement?
It's the most amazing short in history.
Okay.
I mean, it is run by a
hedge-fund behind it was shorting Nvidia stocks in a big way. But...
anything that makes Sam Altman break out into a sweat, it makes me happy. So if it did that, great.
Yeah, I mean, even if it only turns out to be half true, and it's a 2x or 4x improvement, that lowers the curve for what is becoming a very big problem for data centers in terms of power and compute and mean time to failure. If you can half or quarter the number of GPUs you need, it's a lot of power saved. So I'm hoping that there's some merit to some of this, and it's not just
used in water being used.
Short Nvidia stock.
There is. At the back of the V3 paper, they give advice to GPU makers about things they want to do and have. One of the neat tricks they did is they said, well, when you use the matrix math units on these GPUs, on the Nvidia GPUs, it doesn't store the values in an FP32 format. But what if we just grab the intermediate result and throw it out into the CUDA cores and use the CUDA core as a memory store? Oh, wait, now I don't lose any resolution. Now I can proceed with the calculation in a different part of the GPU. and you get a better result from it. So there's some smart stuff in there. And that's what I think the value is. The value is how they interleave the communication in such a way between remote GPUs outside of their nodes in a way that masks the latency and makes it look like, you can go 4 times faster or 3 times faster or 2 times faster. They didn't tell us the number, but it's going to be in that kind of order of magnitude. So I think seeing what they said at the back end, that's the neat bit. I'm a system architect, so I think that way, but
in evolutionary terms, I think we're into a Red Queen cycle whereby one side speeds up, the other side speeds up, and we'll see where it comes. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And this is going to be a hot topic, I suspect, for quite some time. In the meantime, you can join us for another Kettle next week, and you can listen to this Kettle on your standard podcast channels. Thanks very much for joining us.